What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Champions good in solo queue but bad in LCS is pretty interesting to me because these champions are guaranteed to have low ban rates in solo queue, and they're also extremely likely to not receive nerfs in the future, unlike champions that are popular in competitive play. Competitive play is extremely different to any solo queue environment at any rank, and as such, champions have different levels of power across the two spectrums. Champions shouldn't be ignored just because they're bad in competitive play, because oftentimes what makes them bad in competitive play is completely irrelevant for solo queue, and you can dominate on these champions, surprise people a bit with your power levels, all while never getting banned out and not having to fear for nerfs in the future. In this list, I've included a champion for every role and a few extra, so hopefully there's something for everyone here. As well, I've partnered up with ProGuides.com for the editing on this video. If you're into more traditional guides for League, they have a free trial that gets you full access, so you can decide for yourself if you like them or not. And if you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, and if you don't, please hit that dislike. Anyways, let's get started. The first champion on our list is one that I think is pretty interesting, and it's Nasus up in the top lane. Nasus sucks in LCS because his farming system that he has with his Q is a weakness that a coordinated team can exploit and punish pretty easily, and they pretty much just end up lane swapping to deny Nasus farm and make his endgame fantasy nowhere in sight. Lane swaps are super common in competitive play, and they're easy to pull off too and ensure that Nasus is going to have like 40-50 farm 20 minutes into the game, or something horrible. But in solo queue, your opponents are just never going to lane swap. As well, something that's an interesting dynamic of solo queue is this idea of late game scaling. Late game scaling is incredibly powerful in solo queue, much more so than in competitive play, because the uncoordinated teams of solo queue just don't close out games properly, and as a result, pretty much every single game ends up reaching some form of late game in solo queue. And having that late game power is a huge advantage that can net you multiple wins versus a lot of champions just for having that in your kit, no matter how poorly you do in the early game. In pretty much every single solo queue game, there's throws, there's inefficient uses of time, and there's just so many things that drag the game out much more than it otherwise should be, to where Nasus's stacking capabilities are going to do you a huge solid and just let you steamroll everyone in the late game. And with his sustain, his early game isn't that bad either, honestly. It's certainly manageable enough to make work. And he does a great job of being this raid boss in teamfights that is super tanky, has loads of damage, and is just insurmountable a lot of the time. Next on our list, we have Malzahar in the mid lane. He's kind of a weird one. A big part of why he's bad in competitive play is also the exact reason why he's good in solo queue, and it is of course his ultimate. Malzahar's ultimate is an awesome tool for both picks and burst damage combos, which makes it great for solo queue. But it does have some downsides that can be punishing and exploited by coordinated opponents. Malzahar's ultimate's a lot like Warwick's in the sense that while he's casting it, he himself is in a sense crowd controlled, because he's stuck sitting there not moving, casting the ability. So it's possible for an opponent to stop his ultimate or catch him out if the team is coordinated and they're communicating, which solo queue players are not. As well, he's susceptible to counter mechanics from people like Gangplank and such, which makes him a nightmare to do anything but last pick him in competitive play, which makes for a really poor team comp and a poor pick and ban phase, which is really important in competitive play, but again, doesn't matter at all in solo queue, because teams just aren't coordinated enough to play their team comps properly. Next up, it's Volibear in the jungle. Volibear is an interesting case because he's been strong in competitive play in the past, and essentially what happened is that Volibear now just gets countered pretty hard by the competitive meta champions that aren't nearly as popular in solo queue, and he also struggles a little bit versus players who have perfect orb walking mechanics. Volibear is a champion that kind of just has to like run up and get in someone's face, which makes him extremely vulnerable to getting kited by opponents like Lulu and Kalista, Janna and others, and especially an AD carry player who can orb walk and kite perfectly. Whereas in solo queue, Lulu's not that popular. Kalista just received a massive nerf that resulted in her win rate dropping by about 6%, and honestly, players just aren't that good at kiting. Because the thing is that kiting is mostly a team effort. And in solo queue, anything team related just probably isn't going to happen, and even if it does, it's not to the extent that you need it to counter Volibear. As well, Volibear is just an amazing raid boss kind of champion. He does so much damage while still building full tank and having loads of utility and power as well. Another thing is that his passive is unbelievably powerful in solo queue, whereas in competitive play teams will coordinate damage effectively to burst him down together through his passive, since they have a lot more communication. And a lot of Volibear's counter picks too, in the Devourer junglers, have been getting nerfed, and honestly he's always been great in solo queue, but even more so now that a lot of his counter picks are being nerfed in the last few patches. Our next champion is Blitzcrank on support. Blitzcrank's kind of a fun one. A big part of why he sucks in competitive play comes down to people just dodging his hooks a little bit better, but they also counter his strategies a lot better too. On Blitzcrank, especially in solo queue, a lot of what you want to do comes down to these kind of like super cheesy plays like invading the enemy jungler at level 1 by yourself, ganking mid at level 4, roaming top, and doing all these crazy shenanigans and such that if you face a coordinated team working together, those strategies are probably just going to fall flat on their face or get punished super hard. But in solo queue, it's extremely successful and super powerful for carrying games. As well, in LCS, Blitzcrank does a really poor job fitting team composition since he's so linear. Most teams want someone more versatile like Alistar, Janna, Thresh to go with some kind of strategy or counter pick or something. But Blitzcrank just doesn't do that because not only does he have a linear kit, he's a champion that relies a lot more on his opponents making a mistake, rather than him making a play. And he does a great job of punishing those kinds of mistakes with his hook, and in solo queue, those mistakes are happening non-stop every game, and Blitzcrank does a great job of exploiting that. And there's always the chance too in the late game that you can just hook someone and win instantly, whereas in LCS those game-winning hook opportunities kind of just never happen. Next up we have Tryndamere up in the top lane. Tryndamere is a fun one because he's kind of a champion that plays differently to a lot of other champions, and in solo queue he gets rewarded for it. Tryndamere is a huge split pusher, and does one of, if not the actual best job of any champion in the game at split pushing. The biggest threat when split pushing is the fact that when you split push, you're overextending to hit the turret, and you're at risk at dying or getting ganked. And if you split push and die for free, that's one of the worst things you could ever do as a split pusher, and you will get punished for it. But Tryndamere with his ultimate is fantastic for split pushing, because first off, he can reliably dive anyone who comes to stop his push, and secondly, he can also use it with his mobility to escape if the opponents send more than one person for him, and he builds a lot of attack speed too, so he takes towers super fast. This split pushing style allows Tryndamere to be able to carry the entire game all by himself quite a lot honestly, whereas in competitive play teams know exactly how to deal with split pushing, and they'll also take extra counter mechanics like exhaust and other tools to make him completely useless in teamfights. After Tryndamere we have Ashe on AD carry. Ashe is kind of an interesting one because she used to be super popular in competitive play, and although she does have the potential to be popular once again, meta shifts and the Season 6 changes hurt her competitive agenda quite a lot, and she's gone mostly unplayed, for the most part, in favor of other AD carries. But I've always liked Ashe a lot for solo queue. Because of her ultimate, she becomes one of, if not the only AD carry in the game that can still be extremely useful, even if you go like 0-10 in lane. The versatility her ultimate brings allows you to have so much power to carry the game as an AD carry. Typically, AD carries in solo queue can struggle because their team might not teamfight properly, or they don't protect them when necessary, but Ashe is great, because she's one of the few AD carries that you can initiate teamfights with, create picks, and catch out opponents, and you still pump out pretty solid DPS in teamfights. Ashe was buffed a month or two ago, and it helped her a pretty decent amount. And her ultimate is just such an insane tool for solo queue and carrying games, and having that option on an AD carry is just awesome, because it makes her so much less team reliant than other AD carries, who typically depend on their team quite a lot for some element of their gameplay. And as well, we also have Amumu in the jungle. Amumu's always kind of been this case in point of a champion that's good in solo queue but bad in competitive play. Versus coordinated teams, Amumu struggles quite a bit, because he has a hard time dealing with getting invaded non-stop. One or two invades don't hurt him that much though, it requires like this huge team effort to invade him over and over and over again. And if he faces that, he's totally screwed, but that's just never gonna happen in solo queue. As well, in LCS, opponents often avoid bunching up and do a pretty okay job of spacing themselves out to avoid his ultimate. But again, that's another thing that doesn't really happen in solo queue. On the flip side, Amumu is this huge raid boss that with runic echoes brings a tanky force with a bunch of damage, and an incredibly powerful and game-winning ultimate. His ultimate is fantastic in teamfights, and he's perfectly capable of keeping up with other junglers in the early game due to his bandage toss giving him some solid ganks, and when you hit level 6, his ultimate is honestly just free kills over and over again. And the next champion on our list is Zyra Support. It honestly surprises me a little bit that she's not popular in competitive play, but I guess it comes down to her being a skill shot champion whose power is mostly consisted of a super strong laning phase. In competitive play versus a Zyra Support, opponents are just going to lane swap, and she's left being this super squishy, kind of hard to hit skill shot champion in team fights that's not much better than someone like a Lux might be. But in solo queue, she's this laning phase powerhouse. As a support in solo queue, there's almost nothing you can do that will carry the game harder other than winning the laning phase and being useful in team fights. And with Thunderlords and all of her harass and crowd control, her laning is fantastic. And she can pick up some ability power items too and do tons of damage in team fights. Her plants are a force to be reckoned with that really put out a lot of damage without even needing ability power in the first place, and it allows Zyra to carry super hard and be awesome in solo queue. While in competitive play, she's not the worst pick ever, but she does get outclassed by a large amount of champions due to lane swaps. And that just about wraps up the list. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.